Welcome to the Fertile Footprints podcast, the second podcast I'm making. First, I want to start with saying welcome to country. I live on Dadarak country and I would like to pay my respects to the elders past, present and emergent. Today I want to talk about the details of sustainable development. I want to talk about what it is to be carbon neutral, the Millennium Goals, the Sustainable Development Goals and the United Nations Climate Goals. How do we make fertile footprints on this planet? It seems a tough question, but it's not. We know what to do. It is tough only because we don't want to do it. Changing our habits and worldviews is difficult and it's hard work. So it requires discipline and accepting that what we're doing is wrong, which might be a very uncomfortable thing to do. So I want to talk today about how I do this for myself. I want to share some techniques I use to push myself to do better. I want to share about options that are easy to improve on and others that might be harder to do, but will be necessary to do too. Because in the end, we don't have a choice. If we want to continue to live on this planet, we must stop destroying it. So we must change our habit and we must do better. The first step in changing our habits is to educate ourselves. So, what are the Sustainable Development Goals and why do we have them? The Sustainable Development Goals got first developed in 1992 at the Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. And that's where they designed Agenda 21. And now I am aware that there is all these controversies, political ideas around Agenda 21. I don't want to really go into that today or really at any times, because the point isn't what conspiracy theory got, blah, blah, blah. The point is we need to do the right thing and make this planet sustainable and make our society sustainable. So the Agenda 21 is what we've got, so that's what I'm going to continue to roll with. As with everything we do, there is great ways to interpret the solutions or the suggestions, and there's bad ways to interpret them. But what matters is how you interpret them for yourself and how you use these goals to inspire your own behavior and your own choices. So let me start with summing them up. The first one, no poverty. That speaks for itself. Poverty is bad. No one can argue with that. Second one, end hunger. Okay, that's pretty clear too. Ensure good health and well-being. I think that one gets a little bit more vague because what is health? What is health to us is not going to be the same to what is health to the people who don't have access to clean drinking water, for example. Goal number 4, quality education. Goal number 5, gender equality. Goal number 6, clean water and sanitation. Goal number 7, affordable and clean energy. Goal number 8, decent work and economic growth. Goal number 9, industry innovation and infrastructure development. Goal number 10, reduce inequality within and among countries. Goal number 11, build sustainable cities and communities. Goal number 12, ensure sustainable consumption and production patterns. Goal number 13, take urgent action to combat climate change and its impacts. Goal number 14, conserve and sustainably use the ocean, seas and marine resources. Goal number 15, protect, restore and promote sustainable use of terrestrial ecosystem. So this is forest management, combat desertification. I will go into detail about what all these things mean. And land degradation. Goal number 16, promote peaceful and inclusive societies for sustainable development. So that one is in relation to justice. And goal number 17, strengthen the means of implementation and work together internationally. Now, before we go into depth on each of these goals, I want you to notice a pattern in them. There is a variety of goals here, but they relate to basically 3 topics: people, planet, profit. We've got to look after our people, we've got to look after our planet, and we've got to ensure that there is wealth. Because like it or not, only the sun comes up for free. So we use money. You can use seashells, you can use imaginary stones. It doesn't really matter, but we trade as a people and we use a symbolic means to distribute resources, which would be the economy. And these three things are the basic foundation of sustainable development, being aware of all three, making sure that you don't just focus on the economy, but that, when you're trading, you think about the people involved, and when you think about the environment that is involved as well. Now, like an ecosystem, the goals are strongly related to each other, and teasing them apart is not easy, or not. It's not even necessary. So, for example, we want to have gender equality. To improve gender equality, we should be reducing poverty. Reducing poverty would also reduce hunger in the world and increase people's general well-being. They would then be able to improve their choices, and maybe instead of burning brown coal, they could be using solar. Because of their improved economic position, they can improve the materials they use. It would improve the education as well, because they have more resources and they are not hungry, so they can learn better, and they're healthier, so they can learn better. So all these things are very, very strongly interrelated, and I want to encourage you to look at everything like it is an ecosystem that is strongly related parts that form a network instead of linear or separated ideas from each other. We cannot live without others. We cannot live without the other parts within our environment and our ecosystem. It just simply doesn't work like that. But of course, a podcast recording my voice is going to be linear, so I've got to start somewhere. And I want to start with one of my main inspirations in my life, and that is Carbon Neutral 2030. Carbon Neutral 2030 comes from the United Nations Climate Agreement. I think it was set in the Paris Agreement, and I do apologize. I am terrible with names and these kind of details, but you can look this stuff up. You don't need me to tell you that. The point is that to prevent catastrophic damage through the climate crisis, we need to be carbon neutral today, really. I mean, ideally, we would have done this 30 years ago, and we have known this for, at least 38 years. Something was published in 1982 to state that what was going to happen in the future. So we don't really have an excuse in this. We've known that we needed to change our ways, and we know the issues. We have the technology, and you cannot argue that we don't have the money, because we are very, very wealthy all around the planet, especially in Western society. So what is stopping us then from implementing the ideas that we need to implement in the new habits? I think what I found for myself, at least, and this will be different for everybody, but what I find for myself is that setting goals and practically making them SMART goals has really helped me in pushing myself to do more and better. So Carbon Neutral 2030 is where I started that with. And when I did, I looked at, so firstly, what does carbon neutral mean? Like, where are we producing carbon? What processes are happening that increase the CO2 equivalent in the atmosphere? How does this all work? And what actions do I need to take to become carbon neutral? So I want to start with talking about how carbon is being added to our atmosphere. And before that, I need to explain that carbon neutral is not CO2. There are a lot of other chemicals that cause the greenhouse effect, that trap heat from the sun inside our atmosphere. CO2 is by far not the biggest one. Methane is 80 times more powerful than CO2. So for every methane molecule that we put in the atmosphere, there is the equivalent of, its ability to trap heat is equivalent to 80 molecules of CO2. So if you burn that methane, because methane is 1 carbon, 4 hydrogen, you would get 1 CO2 for water. Other big greenhouse gases are nitrous oxide, ozone, and the chlorofluorocarbons and hydrofluorocarbons. These are the gases that we used to use in refrigerators. They're also the gases that are hurting our ozone layer. So the main issues with climate change is CO2 and methane. And those are the ones that we need to reduce towards carbon neutral. So carbon neutral doesn't mean that you don't use any carbon, CO2, don't produce any CO2. It doesn't mean that there will never be any methane again, because that doesn't work. We are always going to be producing some CO2 and some methane. But these two molecules have a life cycle in our atmosphere. And whilst there is a system of getting these molecules, I'm just going to call it carbon equivalent because that makes it easier to talk. So there's a system of getting CO2 equivalents into the atmosphere. There is a system of taking that out again. Carbon sequestering, that's called. An obvious one is trees taking up carbon and growing into matter. And of course, most trees, they'll fall over, rot away, and it gets returned back into the atmosphere again. This is a fairly short cycle, short being ecologically speaking short. I mean, it still takes several hundreds of years. The longer cycles would be where those trees fall down and get buried and form peats and coal and other substrates. It stays in the ground and it is not in the air. The ocean has been sequestering a lot of CO2 and absorbing it into the water, taking it out of the atmosphere. And there would be systems inside the ocean that would turn that into rock, basically, into substrates that are locked where it doesn't come out easily again. And those cycles can take long times, millennia, hundreds of thousands of years, millions of years. So being carbon neutral means that our amount of input of CO2 and methane into the atmosphere equals the rate at which it gets taken out. Now, of course, we have a backlog here, and we need to remove a lot more carbon from our atmosphere to reduce the impacts of global warming and climate change. But let's not go there first. Let's get to carbon neutral first. So the next step then is to analyze where in our lives are we as an individual producing carbon equivalents or greenhouse gases. The system here is going to be very complex, and we have two issues here. One, there is what we do as individuals, and two, there is what is happening in society. There's a lot of things that you and I will never have control over, at least not directly, and they require political action and activism. But first I want to talk about what we can do ourselves. Very straightforward, easy solution. Buy green electricity. Bang, done. Right? You don't need to have the solar panels on your roof. Most countries, at least most Western countries, you can go to your energy provider and buy green energy. So that's an easy one. The second one would be our transport. So the cars we drive. Electric cars are available right now, and there's good options there, and there's more options coming, and this will increase with time. So, I would like to say, buy a Tesla right now. And this is what I say to myself every morning. I want to buy a Tesla right now. Well, obviously that's not going to happen because I don't have $80,000 in my bank account. So this is where the planning comes in. 2030. 2030 is when I want to be carbon neutral. So I sat down and went, okay, to be carbon neutral, I need to buy a Tesla. Well, or another electric vehicle. I just happen to be in love with the Teslas. And I think they do an amazing job as well with their way they produce and advertise. So what do I need to do to get there? Well, firstly, I need to start with a saving plan, right? So if I want to save $80,000 by 2030, that's 10 years from now, so that's $8,000 a year. Of course, the pricing is going to change in that time as well. But I literally have in my head that that's what I need to do. I need to get myself into a financial position where I can save that money so that I can buy an electric vehicle. What do I do in the meantime? Well, in the meantime, I bought the most fuel-efficient car I could find, which happens to be a Prius. And the other thing I'm doing is walking more when I'm in town. I personally have a disability, so I can't ride a bike easily. Actually, and which is actually the only issue with this disability. So, to increase my ability to go through my town without using my car, I am wanting to buy an electric bike. So I'm saving up for that, and I'm doing research on what is the best bikes and how does all that work. So another large source of greenhouse gases is agriculture, meat production, as well as land degradation as a result of increases in agricultural means. So what I decided to do, and look, you need to decide for yourself where you're going to set your priorities in becoming carbon neutral. I'm just sharing my journey here. What I've done two things. One, I've gone vegan. I went vegan before this, actually. I went vegan long time ago, but it sort of pushed me to be more strict in this. And two, looking up where my products that I eat come from and growing more and more myself. Buying it from the shop means some of the products we eat have gone around the globe to get to where you are. The huge amount of transport involved in the food industry is obscene. And all of that is releasing extra carbon. Also getting my food from farms that are more sustainable when I can't grow them myself. I have actually, I am quite extreme in this, but I have changed my diet so that I can grow most of my food myself. So I grow potatoes, I grow leafy greens, I grow fruit, and I grow things like tomatoes and capsicums and things. In winter, I don't get to eat a lot of tomatoes. I preserve what I can, but I'm not that great at gardening, actually. So I don't get to preserve a lot from my own garden, but, still learning. And like I said, it's a 2030 goal. I don't need to be fully self-sustainable in gardening today, as much as I would love that. I need to be fully sustainable in gardening within the next 10 years. So working on that, learning how to garden, learning how to grow food. It's not an easy thing to do if you've not been taught from a young age. It's a skill that requires learning and experimenting. So that's another way that I'm reducing my carbon production. The next big source of greenhouse gases comes from industry, especially the plastics industry. Obviously, most plastics are still made out of oil, and that oil gets pumped out of the ground, pollutes the ocean there directly, gets transported, pollutes the ocean while being transported, gets refined, pollutes the atmosphere while it's being refined. Then it gets transformed into plastics, again pollutes the water systems there. Then it gets turned into products, and there often involves pollution and most certainly involves human rights issues with the workers, especially when it's made in Asian countries. Which is not because Asian countries are inherently bad. I strongly do not believe that. I think it is a result of international politics and the way we have been treating these people and what we have been expecting from these people. It doesn't hurt to take some responsibility for the human rights breaches that are happening in other countries. So what do you do? By 2030, I would like to be able to produce most of the products I use myself. I also want to be completely zero waste. That is a big goal, and it's certainly not an easy one. So reducing what I buy, especially buying online, buying from overseas, is very, very important. And again, this is where I find this goal so useful, because it's so simple to just, I'll just go to the shop and buy this. I'll just go online and buy that. But when you think like, but if I buy that one, it comes with waste, and that doesn't match my zero waste goal. Two, where was this produced? Do I really want to be part of that? Do I really want my clothes to be made by a child? No, I don't. So what I'm working on is learning the skills to produce things myself. So I've learned to sew, and I'll be honest, I learned to sew when I was 5, but I have put a stronger focus on creating my own clothing, and I knit, and I make my own yarn, which is mostly my hobby, but it kind of helps with this. So this week my goal is I just cut hay from my garden, and there was a patch that was really nice and straight, so I separated that from the other hay, and I'm going to make myself a hat because I need a sun hat. It's getting hot here in Australia already. It's early spring. But making my own things, making my own tools, making sure that the tools I do buy are higher quality and looked after better so that I don't need to replace them. That means spending more money initially, usually, but in the long term, it will be better and cheaper in the long term too. I'm learning skills to fix my own tools, to fix my own clothing, to fix my own, things I've got. If I do need something, I will go past the op shops first. And that is a dangerous one for me, though, because it's really tempting to go to the op shop and just buy all the fun stuff that is there. We have been conditioned into materialism and wanting to buy stuff to fill up our space. Not saying no to that is not easy, at least for me. I am trying really hard to embrace minimalism, and I'm doing a terrible job of that. But the zero waste idea does encourage me in this because, I don't want the waste that comes with the product. Zero waste obviously applies to food and groceries as well. And in here there is, on the one hand, bringing your own bags. When I forget my bags, you know what I do? I carried it in my hands. And one, that reduces how much stuff you buy, because usually there's a lot of stuff I don't actually need. And two, it kind of reminds me that I should really bring my bags next time. But there is no need to buy a bag or to use a plastic bags. The shops I go don't usually have cardboard boxing, So I just carried it in my hands, put it straight in my car, and then come home and bring it straight inside the house. Now, to tie these things together, wanting to be minimalistic, wanting to grow my own food, and wanting to improve the pressure on me to use commercialism, is that I've reduced the size of my housing. I'm actually building a tiny house, and that is eventually my dream. Using less resources in my built environment is another way to reduce carbon. There is less reliance on forestry, there's less reliance on often toxic glues and paints and things. Then there's more space for growing food. And so reducing the size of my house, living outside more, going with the environment more, the nature, and it gets a bit woo here maybe potentially, but I find it also is really grounded in a scientific mind. We are animals, so we live on this planet, and this planet has weather, and this planet has rhythms, and this planet has everything we need. So to be more closely connected with that is, one, makes you more sustainable, and two, I think is a very healthy, natural, reasonable thing to do, rational thing to do. So even though all the woo people do the same, I think the scientists should also do the same. And in saying that, I love the woo people. I think they're fantastic. So I don't want to sound like I'm judging them, but I think my audience is probably more likely to be based in that science, more rational kind of lifestyle. So I want to say that, yes, you too can go outside and connect with nature. So, for example, I cut my own hay, right, which is crazy, but it's a lot of fun. I cut it with a scythe. As a human, we have two options when it comes to exercise, right? We can go for a run and cardio, then come home and do weightlifting exercises or whatever, and then do some yoga for stretching. Or you can cut your hay with a scythe, because it is cardio, trust me, it's hard work. And you are using your upper body strength and your legs as well, so you're building muscles and you're stretching. It's a bit like Tai Chi in your hips, like you sort of got to go with the flow of the movement. So I try and tell myself the yoga mantra and moving with my breath and stuff. So the benefits of cutting my own are physical. I get my exercise in. They are practical. I get my hay cut, which I use for my animals, and it is zero carbon. I don't have to use a lawnmower or that runs on diesel or petrol. I don't have to use a lawnmower that runs on batteries that is charged, all my power is solar power, but still there is carbon production and pollution associated with all those options. So using my scythe to cut my hay, and you can cut lawn as well. I can keep my lawn fairly short, not as short as my neighbours keep it, which is more like golf course short, but within 7 to 10 centimetres is relatively easy. Keeping your grass slightly longer is healthier for your grass as well. It doesn't need so much watering. I don't water my grass at all, actually, but I am very fortunate that I have a spring on my block. So it's wet enough. It doesn't need that kind of attention. But it makes your grass more resilient as well, so there's no pest species that take over. There's none of those issues. So yeah, anyway, I mow it with a scythe, and which sounds really alternative, but there is very sound scientific reasons, rational reasons to do that. So to sum it up, I have set goals for 2020 on how I'm going to reduce my transportation, electricity production, my engagement with commercialism, my housing, my food production, and my waste production. And I've gone through each of them and thought through what do I want to achieve and what steps do I need to take? Where do I need to be in 2001? Where do I need to be in 2005? Where do I need to be, to get to where I want to be in 2030? Some of those goals are more clearly like, I'm buying only green power. That was easy. I did that within the 30 seconds of setting the goals. Well, probably actually had that done before, actually. And other goals are more difficult, like zero waste is hard. But I have got it down to one bin every 3 or 4 months now, so that is not too bad. Now, there's one more aspect to carbon neutral 2030, and that is society. So what I've talked about so far is how do I achieve these goals for myself. But if I am the only one in the world that goes carbon neutral by 2030, then that's going to make squidly difference to the world. So a lot of the issues that are related to climate change or the climate crisis are much, much bigger than the individual. And there is really only one way to change that, and that is activism. So activism looks like a lot of different ways. It is voting, it is joining groups, it is this podcast, it is joining protests, it is talking to people, it is leading by example, there's a lot of different ways you can do this. And again, I'm going to encourage you to find your own way to be active within the community, within your local community, within the global community, wherever you see fit, to encourage other people to do the same. So the things I do personally, obviously, starting this podcast was a major part of my 2030 carbon neutral goals, because for me it is a effective way to communicate my ideas and inspire others to do better too. And we all need to do better. I need to do better, you need to do better, the best person in the world needs to do better. So don't want you to feel bad for not being where I am or for not being where you want to be. It's a process, so it's okay. But yes, this podcast and setting up Fertile Footprints, there is the online global side of that, but there's also the engagement with the community and local education programs that I am keen to set up, that I have not yet set up, but it will happen. A big part of what I do is talking with people, and sometimes that involves calling out people. It's like, hey, you just chucked that rubbish on the ground, don't do that. Obviously, I'm a teacher, I'm trained to say, don't do that to the little kids, the big kids actually. Another thing I do is writing letters to politicians, to companies, to pick them up. It's like, I like buying your product, I like going to your shop, but can you reduce the plastic, please? Because I don't like that. I have at times, so I'm not quite so extreme anymore as I was when I was a teenager. I love teenagers because they are so shamelessly extreme in their ideas. Not all of them, but some of them are. But yeah, I used to unpack products in the shop and go, I don't want your rubbish. I just want the food. keep your rubbish to yourself. You grow a bit milder when you get older, I think. But still, those kind of activisms, I have joined in protests, especially the protest run by or organised or inspired by Greta Thunberg. She is brilliant, but like I said, I do love teenagers and their ability to be shameless and expressing their voice. Not just that, promoting these people, which I do now through my podcast, but I do at every opportunity I get. And maybe people might get sick of that sort of behaviour, but most of my friends are used to it and love it, so it's good. But yes, encouraging people to learn about the environment and to learn about the impact they are having and the control they have over these things. Writing letters to politicians does make a difference. Writing letters to businesses does make a difference, especially if we all do it together. So those sort of things I'm doing to be actively involved in the community, in the global community, to change the world for the better and to encourage other people to become carbon neutral or to understand poverty or to understand the issues around women and children and education and the other sustainable development goals that I mentioned before. I haven't talked about it here yet, but I should probably actually really mention it. The issues we have in our water systems, our oceans, our rivers and lakes that are dying, drying up, and especially in the permafrost area where the permafrost is melting and all this methane is going to be released. Making people aware of those issues as part of my activism is really important. I can't directly do anything to stop the melting of the methane the melting of the oceans that releases the methane, but I can go down to my local park and clean the rubbish out of the verges of the water or secretly plant plants to increase the biodiversity or be part of local organizations that do those sort of things. Another thing you can do is donate money, obviously, as a form of activism, as a form of social responsibility to improve sustainable development around the globe or locally, which is kind of around the globe as well, obviously, interrelated there. Okay, so to summarize, our vision is going to be carbon neutral by 2030. The aim to analyze all aspects of our lives to ensure carbon neutrality can be achieved. And then what? What are we going to do next? How are we going to maintain and implement this vision? That would be the next thing to think about. What I found really useful is to put up little signs around my life that this is my goal. So very simple, write it on your fridge, put pictures up, listen to blogs, read articles, go to your Twitter account and start following people that bring out this message that you should be carbon neutral by 2040. Make sure news sources are aligned with this message. Make sure that the rest of your social media is aligned with this message. To create new habits, we need to be constantly reminded of what that new habit is, because it is easy to forget and slip back into your old habits, especially when the new habits are difficult. So when you finish listening to this podcast, I want you to basically grab a pen and paper or directly write on the fridge like I do and put this message out there. What I do too is that with my emails, you can add like a subscript to it and it says be carbon neutral by 2030. Do you have a plan yet? It reminds both me and the people I write emails to that this is an important part of our lives. I find that quite useful in encouraging me to keep going with spreading this message. So now the next issue is we have got 412 parts per million carbon dioxide in the air. That is a lot. Back before the industrial age, it was 280 parts per million, so it's nearly twice as much now. And how many years is that? 300 years, less than 300 years. We've doubled it. The aims of the Paris Agreement is to get back to our atmospheric carbon concentration of 1990, which was 354 parts per million. So we have a lot that we need to reduce. How are we going to do that? There's two ways. One, it will naturally reduce by itself. Something nature does is putting the carbon back into the ground. That is going to probably take quite a long time, and I don't think we have that time. The other thing we can do is actively putting the carbon back into the ground. This is called carbon sequestering. There's two ways of doing that. We can do that using technology, which seems to be tricky, difficult, complicated, expensive, and energy intense. So for example, some techniques to put the carbon back into the ground, the energy that is used to do that is equal to, creates an equal amount of carbon as that you're putting into the ground. So it is, well, carbon neutral, I suppose, but an utter and complete waste of time as a result of that. The best way people like you and I can work on reducing the amount of carbon in the atmosphere is very simple: plant trees. Plant trees every day, everywhere you go. As much as you can, go and plant trees. Look at your garden. How many trees can you fit into that? Look at your community. Where can we plant more trees? Talk to your council. Plant trees. There's people I know that have taken it upon themselves, and they are taking over the bushlands and are planting trees. You can talk with farmers or support farmers to plant trees along their fence lines, which wouldn't just help with the carbon sequestering, but would also help with biodiversity and improve the quality of the farm products. You can pay companies that plant trees. And beyond that, it's not just trees. Changing farming practices will increase the carbon presence in the soil, which when it's in the soil, it's not in the atmosphere. So learning about this and encouraging your community and your farmers around you to use practices that sequester carbon into the soil would be a great thing you can do quite easily yourself. Another thing you can work on is improving the resilience of the natural systems in your area. So a healthy area will naturally store carbon. So an unhealthy system is less likely to be working on storing carbon. This means that if you, for example, have a wastewater treatment plant that is putting out water with too high nutrients, it is impacting on the water system below it, which will then be less likely to be sequestering carbon than it would be if that wastewater treatment plant is putting out water with more neutral nutrient levels. These things might be difficult for you to do as an individual, but talking to the council about this, learning about this, and encouraging these companies to not pollute the natural systems in your environment, in your communities, would be a really good way to improve the carbon sequestering and reducing the amount of carbon that is currently in the atmosphere. Okay, so we're coming to the end of this podcast, and I hope I haven't overwhelmed you with lots and lots of ideas and things to think about. I am planning on going into more details about aspects of the things I've discussed here. I will do a podcast, for example, just focusing on how to be zero waste. These things, all the things I've mentioned, they are a learning journey. They are require for you to educate yourself. So it's okay if it takes time, or if you don't know what I'm talking about just yet. You will by the end of my series of podcasts. Hopefully you will understand exactly what I'm talking about, and then you might want to come back to this one and re-listen to it and see how much progress you have made. My next podcast is going to be about the block of land I've got and the food forest I'm building there. Again, it will probably be quite a general thing, and eventually I will zoom in on the details of what is happening there and why I'm doing the things I'm doing over there. So hopefully you're excited about that, and you will and keep listening to my podcast. In the meantime, I want to thank you for listening to today, and if you'd like to shout me a cup of coffee for my efforts, then you could donate whatever you've got to fertile.footprints@gmail.com using PayPal. It'd be much appreciated. I am doing this for free. I would also appreciate it greatly if you subscribe and like my video, or wherever it is that you're listening to this. and leave a comment. I really would appreciate feedback on what I'm doing for you. And thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.